Welcome to Magic Mike's Castle webcast and podcast. On our next show, we have an amazing magician, Shreeyash Palshikar. You won't want to miss it. We'll catch you then.
Producer and host of his specials on social media based on his magical books of the same name, Dr. Michael, Magic Mike Likey, is also a clinical hypnotherapist and doctor of theocentric psychology. Having performed more than 250 shows a year in the mid-80s and 90s, he also produced and starred in the world's longest regularly produced TV shows in Winnipeg, Canada for 9 years, and guested regularly on broadcast television and starred in A Medieval Feast for 10 years. Star of stage and television, Magic Mike Likey performs illusions large and small and will teach you the secrets of the magical arts, both in person and virtually. This is Magic Mike Likey.
For centuries, India was known as a land of magic and mysticism. My uncle was an Indian magician, and my grandfather was a Hindu priest. A few years ago, I began a magical quest to explore the roots of Indian magic and to learn how it influenced magic all around the world. What did I find in India? I found a whole hidden world of magicians of all types. Ancient masters of the art, young apprentices, mysterious street magicians, colorful stage magicians, traditional and modern magicians, Western and Indian magicians, mind readers, musicians, illusionists, and even a magic clown from Mumbai. These people opened their hearts to me and showed me the true secrets of Indian magic, and it changed the course of my life. Join me on a fabulous journey to explore the secrets of Indian magic.
And that was just a sample of the amazing magic performed by our guest. And ladies and gentlemen, I almost said ladies and germs, I'd like to welcome to our show Shreeyash Palshikar. Thank you so much for joining us this day. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. And when I saw you recently, we did a thing called Flavors of Magic. I was just so excited to see your magic because I could relate to it. Maybe because of my age, I don't know what it was, or maybe the exoticness. I have an intrinsic interest in the Far East and meditation and all things Indian and Oriental. So I could just relate. I loved it. I realized the amount of work, of course, that goes into our craft. And it was quite obvious when you were doing your magic. I don't want to call them tricks. I'd like to call them illusions or effects. And one of my favorites you did, which is a classic, whether folks realize that or not nowadays, is, I believe we call it the Hindu basket. I don't know if that's the commercial name, but we as magicians call it that. And you put, I'm not going to tell them out there the twist because they're probably going to see it down the road, but you put an amazing twist, I'll say 2 twists on it, that was so incredible. Is that one of your favorite ones, or do you love all your illusions?
Honestly, I've grown to like that one more. Ironically, when I first started out doing a more Indian style routine, I wanted to do it with my wife, and she didn't want to do it. So it evolved to this point where I was like, okay, I'm married. My wife doesn't want to do it. She also doesn't want me working with other showgirls. So it had to sit on the shelf for years.
Yes.
And last summer, I was on a Fulbright fellowship in India. And before I went, Heller had told me, look at how the real Indian magicians do the basket trick. They do it with a child. And that is a different trick than a showgirl. And their whole relationship between the performer and the assistant is, the whole story is different, right?
Absolutely.
Then it becomes sort of the Moses story and the Abrahamic myth all wrapped up in one, in a way, right? You've got a child.
Absolutely. It's a whole different narrative, symbolically and literally. And that's one of the things I love that excited me about your magic, is not only my ability to relate, and my desire to relate to it. But on so many other levels, symbolically and otherwise, the authenticity of some of the illusions I've seen you do as well. And there's one I'd love to talk about very, very briefly. Magicians used to do in the 20s or 30s, but I know it's Indian based, I believe it is. And in your show, you call for a Hindu boy. But in this illusion that was very popular, I think in the 20s or 30s, it was the rope. So the rope, yes, there we go. And I believe that it was Thurston who said, is there a young Hindu boy in the audience? And of course no one would answer, because back in those days there wasn't likely. And so then he performed the illusion. But I've read, and I don't know if this is myth or if this is true or what, because I've also got 3 PhDs in metaphysics, and I also teach this. So I've got a part of me that would like to believe certain things. But in the original tale of what I've read, or myth, the boy climbs the rope and disappears into the clouds. It's performed outside. And that is so exciting. How does one duplicate that indoors on a stage? I'm sure Thurston did, and the others did an incredible job. But how, without giving things away, how might you perform it outdoors?
Yeah, I know. It's tough, right? Because one of the things that's so interesting about the rope trick is whether or not it's been performed at all is something people have argued about for a couple hundred years now. So some people say, oh, it's a fake. And you've got these theories where people say, oh, the Indian magician puts, narcotic drugs in the pipe. Or some people say he uses mass hypnosis. I mean, it is such a trick that kind of represents this whole Eastern Western thing. Like you said, some people want to believe that it's completely real, and decapitated, dismembered children are being put back to life, and then some people want to believe it's completely fake. I'm sure the real answer is somewhere in between, right? I mean, this is where it's got to be.
Absolutely. I've read some theories as to the methodology behind it, and because I like to call them lay people. I don't like to refer to non-magicians as muggles. It sounds a bit derogatory, but that's just me. Non-magicians as well as magicians will be watching and listening to this as well, so we won't be giving anything away. But an effect, it's a floating effect that Orson Welles was said to have performed at a lot of garden parties, was his rising card, and it would come out of the deck and continue floating up out of view towards the trees or clouds. It was a very, very cloudy day. Every time he performed it, he would make sure that, it wasn't clear. So I would think that there might, if the effect in fact was real, like if Indian magicians actually did it, that perhaps there would be cloudy circumstances. I know I have a number of methodologies in my head. If I were to do that, if I were to duplicate, I actually see you duplicating indoors or outdoors these legendary, I won't call them based in myth or mythological effects, because really it's symbolism, isn't it? And a lot of people, and this bothers me a little bit, yoga, I don't know if you're familiar or not with yoga, but it's really love songs. I believe in Sanskrit, and which have become whatever it is nowadays, new age stuff and poses, probably without the breathing, which is everything. So I honor and respect thousands and thousands and thousands of year old traditions, and I get excited when they're brought to modern day theaters, if you will, or living rooms, etc. And right? And this is something I want to discuss with you a little bit, is the advantage of virtual magic nowadays. Nowadays, I'm sounding so old. What we're kind of faced with, but I believe there's a reason for everything, is we as magicians have been plopped into having to do magic on the internet or through the internet, through Zoom or virtual magic, as I like to call it. How do you find it's affecting you at all? Is it affecting you in positive ways, negative ways?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, as you said, everyone in the profession is dealing with that right now. And it's interesting you say that because I'm actually in touch with some traditional Indian street magicians who are, in fact, we're trying to set up, oh shoot, is that audio bad? They're trying to set up a virtual show for themselves. And I've been encouraging them to use the medium and said, you may be sitting in a slum in Delhi, but now suddenly you have access to the world. So I guess one of the things I've found that I've had to adapt my performing style is to try to make sure that I'm giving the audience enough of a view so they don't think that I'm tricking them, right? Because if I reach off screen and then come up with something, everybody knows that I've just taken it from off screen. So I feel like there's a lot of discipline in keeping in frame. I used to do a lot of close-up magic in Chicago for many years. And, if the spectator has in his mind a doubt, he can tip his head or look around or say, hey, give me that deck, I'm going to look at it. And so I feel like as stressful as those situations are when you're a very young magician, you realize that from a spectator's point of view, the spectator is clearing their doubts as to what method has been used so that they can then experience a wondrous moment.
Absolutely.
And you as the performer are trying to do that for them. But, now we're in this world where we have to sort of tilt our hands and make sure they can clearly see and again, keep them in frame and all that. It's interesting.
It is. It's fascinating, and
I love it. Like, there's nothing. I said this in another show, on another show rather. There's nothing like the energy of a live audience. Nothing can compare. But I have 9 years. I'm not saying this to brag. I'm actually very grateful. I was on television with my own show for 9 years. I was a guest on another major show back in the 80s or 90s, actually early 90s. And I love, at first I did not love performing as I'm actually doing now, we both are, to the camera. Because you're putting out this energy, hopefully, and you're almost imagining thousands of people or more watching. And that's exciting. We're just not getting necessarily the feedback back. So with my experience with television, I actually love this. I'm in my realm, if you will, with Zoom and with virtual magic. And the other plus, I think you touched on this, is we get to have exposure and experience magicians from all over the world. We're getting to watch lectures, we're getting to do lectures. It's a very exciting time, which I really hope once COVID, I was hoping not to mention that, once COVID is done, maybe in about 2 years or so, we're still going to be able to have the option to do virtual magic if people want. And there's nothing like having magic in your home. There's nothing like turning on your TV or turning on your laptop and, there's David Copperfield or there's Max Maven, who, the lay people will say who maybe, but we won't. And, or whoever, teaching us or showing us. It's a very exciting time. So I'm very grateful from that perspective that we have that opportunity. In Vancouver, Canada, where I am right now, we have 3 major local clubs, 2 IBM and 2, it sounds like, I'll trade you 2 IBMs for an SAM, but we have a local SAM and 2 IBMs, and I've been able to attend every meeting because once a month, actually 3 times a month, I get to go to the club's meetings and we share magic. It's not the same like, experiencing the magicians in person, but wow, I mentioned this to the clubs. I hope we can continue this once COVID is done. We're going to pause for a moment, for a break, a PSA, etc. And we'll be back with my incredible guest, Shreeyash. We'll be back right after this.
Enjoy Magic Mike Likey's animated cartoons, comic books, CDs, and DVDs available from Amazon. He's also the author of more than 45 self-help alternative wellness books, as well as instructional magic books, all available from Amazon. Published in international magicians' trade journals, Magic Mike Likey is a member of the International Brotherhood of Magicians and the Society of American Magicians.
And we're back with my amazing guest, Shreeyash Palshikar. Thank you so much for agreeing to join us this day, Shreeyash. So we began talking a little bit about your fellowship and studying, and you brought up a great point off air with me, a very famous, world famous magician who was actually born in Winnipeg, Canada, but Toronto claimed him, is Doug Henning. And he had great interest and involvement in matters Eastern, Far Eastern, meditation, etc. And he had some kind of fellowship or scholarship involving magic. I think he was probably one of the first, if not the first. And let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I remember seeing Doug Henning on television as a kid performing, the sands of the desert and various things. And then I later learned that he had won some sort of Canadian government fellowship to study with Di Vernon in the United States. So I was lucky enough last year to win a Fulbright fellowship from the U.S. Department of Education to go and study in India and to really look at the traditional street magic as a performing art. And there have been a couple of authors here and there that have done this, but by and large, unfortunately, in contemporary Indian society, the street magician is considered on the scale of the beggar or the sort of charlatan, or they aren't, even before the pandemic happened, they weren't easily allowed to perform in public. The police would harass them, sometimes physically beat them. There just isn't that kind of busking culture. Now, in Canada and Europe, you have festivals, outdoor performing festivals where people go, or I'm sure in your town there's like a space where people would say, oh, we're going to go there and see the juggler, see the magician. And yeah, it's quite sad in a way. I mean, I was there, in Delhi and Kolkata and various cities last summer, and many of the traditional magicians are really, really struggling. And what's really sad about that is that their magic is great. I mean, on the one hand, if they were just sort of terrible, useless vagabonds, you might say, well, I don't feel so bad. But a lot of the Western tricks that we do derive from traditional Indian tricks. And, they, as we were saying earlier, the idea of putting someone in a closed space and putting blades through them. I mean, how many random Western tricks are, again, random magician puts a random showgirl in a specially built magic box and puts some sort of special blades into it, but when you're on the street putting a child in a basket, putting swords in, or as you said, the rope trick, or any of the kind of very traditional, even the levitation that we think about with somebody kind of in the air, with magicians would call it broom suspension, or Robert Houdin called it ethereal suspension. But before Robert Houdin performed that, there was an Indian magician called the air Brahmin, I think, in South India, who would sit cross-legged, apparently in the air with a small rod, and his eyes closed and meditating with prayer beads. And before there was the blooming rose bush, there was the mango tree trick. So a lot of traditional tricks have been kind of refigured by Western magicians. But the idea, like we would say nowadays, the intellectual property, the concept of the effect, comes directly from the streets of India.
Absolutely. I'm so excited and grateful
that you're bringing, as far as documentation and history, this richness to not only to the magic world, but to the broad public as well. And do I see a book or some kind of video in the future? I'm hoping.
Right now, yeah.
It's crucial. People have to, well, they don't have to, but I believe that everything has some kind of starting point. I mean, we can get philosophical and metaphysical and say there's no beginning and no end and all that, but I'm not going to go there. Everyone needs a jumping off point.
Right.
And as you have said, magic in particular has had as its roots, I know this as, I won't call myself a magical historian, I don't have that moniker yet, I would like to have that credential, but in my spare time I've done a lot of research, And a lot of it, if not all of it, is based in the Far East, specifically India. And I would love the youth of today and the youth of tomorrow, and even grown-ups, if you will, our peers, cognizant of that and knowing that, because it makes you feel even better, that richness of that heritage. And I love comparing as well. You mentioned what we call a broom suspension. I used to do years ago in my act. It wasn't a broom suspension, it was called a pitchfork, but it didn't have the points. But it was the pole, and it looked a lot like those woodcuts we would see from the old world, I'll call it, of the lady or the child, kind of like this, well, it's really a right angle position, eventually getting to that. And that, of course, is based in Indian magic. I've seen the art, I've seen the woodcuts, and I'm just so excited that you've taken this on and has decided to allow you that, that ability to do that. What do you see in your future or your near future? Maybe we tackled it already. I talked about a book and a video, but what would you like to see for yourself as far as magic is concerned?
I guess one thing I am trying to do is, in a sense, create what you might call fusion magic, like you have fusion music.
Yes.
Because I'm not a traditional Indian street magician, so I go to them, I look at, I can learn from them. But I mean, I've also hung out with Jay Marshall and Eugene Berger, and the great Chicago magicians, and now I'm in Philly, and I go to the SAM in Vegas, and so it's I feel like there's something really unique there, because I'm biracial. I'm Indian American. My father's Indian. My mother's American. My uncle was an Indian magician, but again, not a traditional street magician. My uncle in India used to do handcuff escapes, card tricks, coin tricks, eating the razor blades. So in a sense, in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s in India, what seemed exotic was a guy in a suit, doing Western magic. And in fact, it's very interesting, because I used to ask my uncle about traditional Indian magic, and he would always say, "Oh, don't go to their neighborhood. It's a sort of dangerous place, and it's a dying tradition." And he would actually tell me straight up, "You're in the West. You should study Western magic. Do card tricks. That's where the exciting new stuff is coming from." I think there's something to be said for just kind of finding ways to blend those two traditions. And I know I'm not the first person to do this. I mean, obviously, my uncle was doing it. Sam Dalal did it. I think one thing a lot of people don't know is just that the actual dates, like the fact that Indian magicians came to the UK in the early 1800s, makes them probably some of the earliest Asian performers that were traveling. Like Chinese and Japanese circuses came much later, in the late 1800s.
Yes, absolutely.
And one of the stories very few people know is that the first magician to tour in the U.S. was in 1818. I mean, if you think about that, that's so much earlier, again, than most people think. Vaudeville didn't exist in 1818. Like, here was the guy performing, but he had been brought to England, and then he basically packed up his trunk and came to the U.S. and went up and down the eastern seaboard from Boston to D.C.
Absolutely. I understand you have an effect, a mini illusion of sorts that you like to share with us. Would you mind?
Yes. No, absolutely. That would be great.
Thank you.
And just from a historical perspective, you may know this, and your viewers may be aware that this effect is at least 500 years old. It was written up in Discovery of Witchcraft in 1584, and since then, it's often referred to as the Hindu thread mystery, shall we say. Now, one thing I really like about this for our modern times is the fact that what's been happening lately with what we call social distancing is our personal connections with each other have been broken. So we don't have the chance to see each other in person. We don't have the chance to share meals together. We don't have the chance to share, hugs. We don't have the chance even to share necessarily family events. There's been so many things that have broken all of these connections between people. And that is in some ways, as you said, kind of a frightening thing, right? I mean, people are social animals. They want to connect. They want to get together. So this effect, what I've noticed, kind of performing it in the virtual world is that part of the idea is, can you take all of these little pieces and say, once our time of isolation and this virus is done, is it possible to reconnect all of these little things so that we can again get back together? And I don't know if it's possible. I often wonder. Sometimes it takes a little bit. Let's see. I don't know if it's going to work. And we don't really know once this thing is done if it's going to work. But if this is any guess and hint, in fact, we will be able to reconnect once this virus is done.
Wonderful. Or as we go nowadays, we would do this.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome.
I love the story. I love what you've done with that, how you framed that. It's so special and so important and perfect for virtual magic, for Zoom magic,
Yes.
if you will, because it's
Yes.
right there. It's right. Actually, it's closer than if you would be there. You would never get that close to a person's face, or you wouldn't want to, or they wouldn't let you. But like this, you can get in there and see.
Yes.
How does anybody contact you, Shreeyash? I'm sure it's easy, but let's tell everyone when this is finished and edited. I'll have titles at the bottom with your website, etc. But so what is your website URL and contact info?
Okay. The website URL is palshikar.com, and that's spelled Palshikar. And that's just my last name. And I guess I could throw my phone number out there. It's a U.S. phone number, but it's 203-298-2386.
Very good.
You don't know how pleased, excited, and happy I am that you took the time to join us today. Will you join us in the future again?
Of course, I'd be delighted.
Awesome. We would be delighted as well to have you. There's so much more to talk about. I know that.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom, some of your wisdom, with us today. And I'd like to thank all of you out there as well who joined us. Thank you so much, and we'll see you all really soon. Thank you.